So we're being conned left, right and centre, and it's just astonishing that the public are so easily manipulated, as I say, through massive fear, one thing after another. And that's why I hate even reading a lot of articles from the media. You're given the articles by the media to read, obviously. And I remember when I tuned in many years ago to Patriot Radio, there was an elderly lady, about in her 80s, I think she said she was. And she said she'd been following the Patriot community her whole life. And it was set up initially during the Cold War, at that time using Christian groups to slag basically the communist system. That was the CIA funded at the time. And she said, I've been following this for about 60 odd years. And she said, I've never seen the public being able to change any of this agenda. They've all chattered about it. Lots of folk make their living off it. But nothing has stopped this agenda, or even diverted it, in fact. And that is true because, you see, unless you have an organization, a very powerful, dedicated organization with a hard line, as hard as the communists used, they would allow and tolerate any deviation from the hard line with a philosophy to back it up and their own plans to back it up. Then really all you are chattering like lab rats stuck in a cage waiting for the technicians to come in the morning. And you're chattering, are they going to inject us today? Are they going to shock us today? And oh my God, what are they going to do to us today? That's literally where people are today. There's no real unification. There's no philosophy. And there's no dedication. There's got to be a hardline dedication or dedicated group that can put across their philosophy and will not tolerate any deviation from the philosophy. Any true grassroots organization that starts up is infiltrated very quickly, and whatever tenets they start off with are quickly subverted into the mainstream, and then there's argumentation, fragmentation, and then they're dissolved. That's the techniques that's used against them. It's not hard to do either. So what I try to tell people here is you've got to be an individual first, because if you notice, everyone keeps saying, what should we do? We. You've got to be a person first to know who you are before you start off with we. Think about that. Hi folks, I'm back cutting through the matrix, just trying to tell you that really you should be very discerning about not just movements themselves, but also what truth is. And what's the most pertinent truth, of course, you can find what's actually the most pertinent information you can get, and what order of priority would you list it all, because you have to decide these things for yourself, because ultimately no one's going to help you accept yourself. No one can, you see. And if your premises are all askew, or you're all over the roadmap with 1,000 terrors and fears at the same time, you won't be able to come through anything that really does happen. But getting back to how we're kept under the gun, so to speak, with fear and terror. Remember, the New American Century came out with their list of war plans for the countries they wanted to take down. They first published it, I think, in 1992 or 93, then back again 97 or 98. And they had a whole list of countries. All the Arab countries are finishing off now were on that particular list. And Syria was to be, I think, one of the last ones, and Iran too. So nothing changes. You're living through constant fear and terror as the big boys, the same boys that run the banks and all the rest of it. I'm talking about the big banks and do all the bubbles and the cons and award themselves billions of dollars. They're behind it all. In fact, a guy, I think even on that Inside Job mentions it, and he's from the Federal Reserve. He says, well, the banks run the country. They run the government. But look at what's happened with the spraying that started before the 21st century. Because this is the century of change, and they weren't kidding when they talked about the century of change. We had the constant spraying from 1998 onwards. That was like daily spraying to the present time in the air across most parts of the world. And then in the 90s too, we also had the West Nile virus. That was going to kill us all, right? And then that faded away into nowhere. And then we had 9/11 in 2001. And then when Afghanistan invaded 2001, because they were already on the border before the towers were hit, and the invasion armies were ready to go in. And then we had SARS 2002, 2003. That was the first big test to see if the public would panic and do what they're told and all wear masks, walking around like idiots and so on, even though it only affected people who are of Chinese descent. And then we had avian flu 2003 to 2005, right? That went nowhere, flopped out. And then we had Iraq in 2003 invaded. Then we had Thailand 2004 with a tsunami. And then we had Katrina 2005. And then we had the bombings in London on 7/7/2005. Then back to swine flu. That was a new one again, 2007 to 2010. Going to kill us all, Then we had the bank crash in 2008. And then we had all the subsequent bailouts across the world, and it's still ongoing yet. And the same guys are still in charge, really. Or some of them are even promoted. Then we had Haiti in 2010 with the earthquake. Then Christchurch, 2010. Then with the Gulf oil spill in 2010. Then Fukushima in 2011. And then the invasion of Libya. And we're still on a roll, So this is the stuff that the mainstream is full of all the time, and they'll have a whole list of things to come, I'm sure. I'll just get a little look at it to see what's going to be. It's good to have advanced warning, what not to read. But it's one thing after another, and they're never going to stop, because this is how they keep you feeling minuscule and powerless. And then when you're powerless, you do what the big boys tell you to do. You allow your rights to be taken away from you. You allow yourself to be pushed around. And you answer them all as massa. You're even taught to call the bosses massa. Yes, massa, no massa. It's a simple technique of terror. And this is, of course, the latest technique of they're using in psychology and neuroscience to manage the public, and it works very, very well. The other thing, as I say, is that the more terrified people become, the more they'll escape into fantasy. It's the only little safe place they think they have. And then when they go into the fantasy, they're being indoctrinated with even more terror, because most of the big movies and now the big hits are to do with how the CIA is monitoring the bad guy or the good guy, it depends who he is, all through countries and so on, with all their high-tech equipment. And you're getting the messages now, they're all powerful. The Wizard of Oz is running the whole show, and you can't escape his gaze, like the all-seeing eye of Horus or Ra. So we're on a roll, as I say. So don't be terrified by the news. And a lot of the news really is simply reinforcement of previous stories. And a lot of the news too is really to make you buckle under and escape. Don't talk about safe things, nice safe things, and you'll feel better about yourself, because even if someone's listening, you have less fear of them coming to do anything about it. Do you realize that the top levels of governance, as they call it, and I'm talking about the spy agencies, they're way above, I'm sure, the levels of the CIA. They know what's going to happen. They have everyone's calls and so on. They have all the gangsters and crooks' calls and all the rest of it. They know what's going to happen, but they don't act on it. Because if they act on it, they give the game away just how under total surveillance the whole system really is. They leave it to the bottom line guys. If they stumble across it, then good luck to them. That's how they see it. But otherwise, they won't even tell the lower agencies below them how much they know.